Well, we've got a very dramatic subject. We're really looking at Russia, Iran, Israel, and then the Abraham Accord. We'll look at those things tonight. But first of all, remember where we were last time. We looked in Revelation chapter 16 on the PowerPoint, and remember here was a letter of love from the Lord, the book of Revelation. And the particular exhortation for us is to watch and to keep our garments. Now, the watching should stimulate us to make sure we keep our garments clean until the Lord returns. Now, that's also brought up in 2 Peter. 2 Peter is also a letter of love. Notice how it begins, verse 1 of chapter 3. This second epistle, beloved. Again, verse 8, verse 14, verse 15. Beloved, agapetos. It's the word agape, related to that word agape. It's a letter of love to us. And what's Peter saying to us? Peter says, fulfilled prophecy is utterly certain. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. So we've got to be careful, brethren and sisters, watching and keeping our garments so that we're prepared. And he'll come at a time which we may not even think. But I want to show tonight that it looks like it's very soon. Well, 2 Peter goes on in verse 11 to 13. What manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation or manner of life and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of the Lord, looking for the new heavens and the new earth. That's what we want, isn't it? The kingdom, wherein dwelleth righteousness. Now, it's interesting, those words there are quoted from Isaiah 65 and clearly relate to the second coming of the Lord. The second coming of the Lord. So it relates to us. But he goes on in verse 14, wherefore, beloved, again, seeing that you look for such things. That's what we're here for, isn't it? Be diligent that you may be found of him in peace, without spot and blameless. So that's the purpose of watching, brethren and sisters, that we might be ready and prepared and keeping our garments, and thereby being blameless when the Lord returns. It's very, very valuable, isn't it? Well, the year has begun, 2021. And again, the doomsday clock has been set, and it's set 102 seconds instead of 120. It's getting closer and closer to doom. Even the world is seeing that. It's gone from 2 minutes to 100 seconds. It's the closest it's ever been. Look, there's where it's been down through time, and we're getting closer and closer. And we know it. They don't appreciate what that means, but we do. So tonight, we're going to follow the subjects of our title. First of all, we want to look at Putin's power. We look at the power of Putin. Now, what I want to do each night, each section that I'm going to go into, each of those sections that started with a P, I want to go through it chronologically, all right? I want to go from the start to the finish. And so, in this section, first of all, I want to look at what Russia's up to. And I want to go right back now, almost 14 months ago. And it was working in Egypt. Daniel chapter 11 verse 42 says this, he, speaking of Russia, shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and over the precious things of Egypt. So Russia's been down in Egypt, has it? Yes, it has. Here we are, very late 2019. A special summit was held where there's Mr. Putin joining up with Mr. Soko, head of Egypt, El Sisi, head of Egypt. And coming to that was a huge number of people. Huge numbers. 43 African heads of state there. And down came Putin and he established in Egypt, listen, an industrial zone, a financial industrial zone, which he called the Suez Canal Economic Zone. Ooh. Now remember that quote, he'll come down for silver and gold. So there's an economic reason there. Here's what they're expecting. Oh, that jumped to quote one. Come back. Here's what they're expecting it's going to be. They're expecting he's going to spend something like 7 billion in that area. 7 billion in forming this huge industrial zone. It will offer to the Egyptians 35,000 jobs. He's investing heavily in Egypt. Remember that quote? It comes down for silver and gold. So you see, coming to that conference was people from all over Africa. Russia has concluded a military cooperation agreement with 21 countries in Africa. 43 of the leaders came, and what happened was, as well as that, after that, very shortly afterwards, that plane flew down there to South Africa. Right across the whole African area. It's the biggest plane Russia's fundamentally got, a huge nuclear carrying capacity that it's got. On a friendly visit saying, you be buddies with us or else, I suspect. So we can see what's going on. And the Egyptians, they've got the lesson pretty clear. They had manoeuvres together. There's the Egyptian and Russian ships, and they went right up through here into the Black Sea together. Russian-Egyptian drills under joint command, right? Under joint command. A source of concern for Ankara, Turkey. We expect Russia to take Turkey, don't we? Ultimately. Bit more upon that. Whose relationship with Moscow has been deteriorating due to Turkish intervention in Libya and Armenia and Azerbaijan conflict. More on that in a second. So you can see, when he went home, little wonder he said this. Putin warns of a Middle East war. Vladimir is set to lead Russia politically for the rest of his life, he says, and is warning at some time of a catastrophic Middle East war in the near future. Some countries aren't doing what it wants. That's what he is saying, and they better start to change. So here's Mr. Putin. He went back, and now, around about July the 2nd, a little earlier than that, he had an election. He wanted to be into power for at least 3 voting periods, another 16 years, and he got it. Oh yes, they didn't vote for him, they voted for things that he said he would set up. So you see, the election, they say, critics slammed the plebiscite as undemocratic. It was set up, it was cooked. His name wasn't in the voting list. They voted for something not knowing what they were getting, but they voted for what would give them the best. And underlying that was Mr. Putin was going to be in power for another 16 years. That was the deal. So Putin's grip on power is now very strong. But you see, he wants to put us to sleep. So guess what the papers have said? Vladimir Putin to step down. This is afterwards. Look at the date. November. Oh, he's going to step down because he's got Parkinson's disease. You can relax. Russia's not going to go to war, is it? Well, what does the scripture say? In Daniel chapter 8, I'm using the ESV because it's a little bit clearer, by his cunning, and that's talking about Russia's leadership, his cunning, we'll say Mr. Putin, he shall make deceit to prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great, and without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the Prince of Princes, that's Christ, and he shall be broken, that's Putin, by no human hand. And of course we know it could be another leader, but it looks very dramatically like he's the right one. So we can see things are changing. But you see, what must Russia do? Well, it must take control of Turkey. We know that well. The Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, is already dried up somewhat. This quote has been partially fulfilled, but not completely fulfilled. Revelation 16 verse 12 says, the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, which is the Turkish Empire that stretched over the Middle East. And the water thereof was dried up, and the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. Well, it's not completely dry, but Turkey's still there. So expect Turkey to fall. Turkey has already provoked Russia quite a bit this year. Here's one of the things it's done. Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, plans to turn Hagia Sophia, which is a church built way back, about 200, 300 AD, turn it into a mosque, and he has. He's turned it into a mosque, and what do the Russians think? A threat against Hagia Sophia, the name of this place, is a threat to our spiritual history, says the Patriarch Kirill, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church. There he is. What could happen to Hagia Sophia will cause deep pain amongst the Russian people. Ooh. So the people are going to be very concerned. What would we expect to happen? Well, Brother Thomas, when he wrote Elpis Israel, he put over the top of Elpis Israel 3 pages, glued it together or stapled it on, I'm not sure how they did it in those days, but sent it to Lord Palmerston in the British government. And he said in that cover letter, he, the Russian autocrat, is preparing to avail himself of its distractions. Ooh. To plant the Greek cross on St. Sophia. That's Hagia Sophia. It's going to put a Christian cross over the top of it and control it. And to establish its ascendancy over the enfeebled dynasty of the West. So that's recorded in Herald Volume 1 and also in Elpis Israel, in my Elpis Israel, page 420. I think some of them got different page numbers, but there it is. So you see, the British Parliament was warned way back that Russia would take control of Turkey and it would be possibly a religious thing that will provoke them. Now, Brother Thomas thought that would happen before Christ's return. But by the time he wrote Eureka, he changed his mind. He said, Christ is going to come at a time you think not. Well, we think Russia's going to take Turkey. And if Russia took Turkey, we'd think Christ is going to come straight away. So in Eureka, he said, we have not to wait the advance of the Russian Gog against Constantinople. Don't expect it, brethren and sisters, before Christ's return. And the stretching forth of his power over Egypt and the Holy Land. This will certainly come to pass, but it will all be consequent, that is, after the appearing of Christ in Teman, Sinai. So the return of Christ will come first, then Turkey falls, according to Brother Thomas in Eureka. Well, let's move on. Now, I might add that I'm tending to go under each of those key headings in our title chronologically. There'll be occasions when I might have to vary that a little bit, but we're going through the year that's going on. So Putin's now voted in, right? What did he do? Within a few days, he moved on to Gama. What's Tagama? That's that area there, the Caucasus. Gomer and all his bands and the house of Tagama of the north quarters and all his bands and many people with thee. So it's that territory called the Caucasus. And they moved. Now we're not going to read all this, but here's some of the weaponry he poured into that area. His best trained soldiers, along with tanks, MiG fighters, long-range missiles, tactical weapons. Some of the very best Russia had, not in huge numbers, but in quality, went down into that area. Into the area which is represented here, and a little bit more clearly in another one of the pictures. So he went down into that area, and he went into the area of Armenia. Now, that's the area there that's contested between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's called Nagorno-Karabakh, and that's what they were fighting over. The conflict at the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan, a narrow but critical transit highway for energy, says Israel. The only outlet between the Caspian Sea oil fields and Europe that doesn't transit Russia or Iran. So Russia got control of it. And provides Israel with 40% of its oil. Israel's found plenty of natural gas, but not oil. Not oil. Now, 4 pipelines come through there, but one of them goes down here. And Israel sends oil tankers up there to get its oil. Cut that off, and Israel would be in a terrible situation in war. It wouldn't have the oil that it needs. So the fighting took place, about 2,000 died. And then, into that area came the Russian defence minister, and they formed a peace deal. Russian military shipments to Armenia, a dangerous situation. And then July the 12th and 16th, July clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan were the worst. But the result was, finally, down came this leader, and he spoke to the Azerbaijanis, and he brought peace. So here we are, down came another man. Can we recognise this chappie? Putin. Talking to the leader of Azerbaijan and Armenia, and brought peace, and took control somewhat of those 2 areas. Putin hosts trilateral meeting with Armenia and Azerbaijan leaders. Putin has hosted a trilateral meeting in Moscow. It looks like they went to Moscow, sorry. With the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Nearly 2 months after Russia brokered ceasefire agreement. So to some degree, Russia has got now control on that area. And the Debka article said they think it means that later they will use it to attack Turkey. That's how they saw it. Amazing. But of course, through that area comes a lot of oil into Europe. And now Russia somewhat controls it. There's 4 pipelines, but here's one particular one that's just been completed, called the TAP pipeline. And it's a market dominated now by Russia. Russia already controls about 34% of Europe's gas, now even more, because it's got control of this area somewhat at this stage. So things are moving dramatically. You'd be very frightened if you were living there, wouldn't you? But you see, they're putting us up to sleep still. Here in Russia, this man here, crazily, he was poisoned on a plane by the Russians, got to Germany, healed up, and went back to Russia, and straight away put back into a prison. And the result is that supporters for him are calling for rallies right across Russia. Here's a map of some of the rallies. It's not a very clear picture there, but it's right across Russia. 300,000 flood the streets of Russia. Top diplomats of USA, Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy and Japan, as well as high representatives of the European Union, condemned Putin for what he's doing. It's distracting us. Remember that quote? Remember that quote? By his cunning he shall make deceit to prosper, and he shall destroy many. So, brethren and sisters, be careful. Don't let that put us to sleep, as I'm sure other people in the world are. They think, Russia couldn't do anything now. Couldn't do anything now. But, brethren and sisters, Russian leader will seem to be weak and distracted. That's the idea we're getting. And so, here's Putin. What does he say to his own people and on to the press? Look at the date this year. Russia's Putin warning of a worsening global instability. And he ends the article. Putin hailed the decision by Russia and the United States to extend their last nuclear arms control pact as a positive move. But he added that spiralling tensions resemble the situation before World War II. So the thing is looking scary. And he's, so to speak, saying to us, it's not now, because of all these things. Well, don't believe it, it could be. And Russia is preparing, dramatically preparing. World War III panic, says the Express, a London paper. Russia reveals terrifying new military weapon as global tensions rise. Ooh, things look frightening. Well, there's Russia. Now let's move on to Persia. Persia or Iran. Well, what do we expect? That to be allied with Russia. The Prince of Rosh, Meshech and Tubal and all thine army with Persia or Iran. So here we expect this territory allied to Russia. It's the area that is dominantly Shiite. That's in the green. And in the yellow, the Sunnis. They're a more moderate Arab. They fear each other now because of the power of Iran. Iran scares them because they're trying to build nuclear weapons. They're developing weapons all over the place. And these countries here are buying weapons frantically to defend themselves. But as you'll see in a minute, they're allying with Israel to help them. But you see, the biggest problem is this. America is pulling out. Because of the coronavirus fear, you know, if one of their soldiers gets something and they put them in hospital, they won't get a prime spot like they might at home, so they're bringing them back into America. I know America's overwhelmed by the problem, but they're coming back. And guess what? Russia is already moving up to take the void. They're moving into that area. So what's Iran up to? Well, it's built missiles. Here's a few. Here's a few of their missiles. Their missiles, well, they can go that distance, but they can also go into orbit. And so the papers are saying they could hit even America if they wanted to. Only this week, I'll show you here. Only this week, Iran fires long-range missiles 1,800 kilometres out into the Indian Ocean and hit the sea about 10 kilometres from American vessels, American military vessels, to show their power, their capacity. But here is the underground missiles, so somebody can't hit them. That's their aim. But look what's happening in Iran. Here's the nuclear centres. I've got the pictures of 3 of them. There are 10 centres where they're developing nuclear power, concentrating uranium so they can build atom bombs, concentrating plutonium, another substance, to make atom bombs. And so they're developing that frantically, and they're saying to Israel, we could attack you soon, look out. More on that in a minute. So as the year rolled, right at the start of the year, last year, America killed this man, trying to calm the scene down. He was their top military man, and he was killed in a terrorist activity or an activity triggered by Russia, America, it appears. Then Israel acted. Whoops, 2 pictures there. Israel acted, it appears. Here is one of the nuclear bases. They didn't get it all, they got part of it. It was underneath this old building here. It looks pretty tame, doesn't it? But here it is afterwards. Israel hit that 23 kilometres outside of Tehran, and the shockwave went across Tehran. July this year. And then a little later on, the top nuclear man, the top nuclear scientist was killed. There's a picture of him there. They believe it was Israel, but, you know, they normally say to Israel, did you do a thing? Did you do it? They say, well, we do a thing like that? Would we do that? Well, what happened was a vehicle was placed on the road on the way from his home to where he was working on nuclear power. And it was controlled by a satellite, so they say, and as he went by, it pictured him, and then it shot up his car and killed him. And then it blew up. So nobody could prove who did it. Pretty amazing. But it hasn't stopped there. In Iraq, the chief military man is that man. Iran denies Revolutionary Guard commander killed in Iraq-Syrian border drone attack, but it appears he was. Apparent ease with which assassins are able to target Iranian figures 3 times this year. They're giving Iran a warning from America and from Israel, look out. It hasn't stopped there. Hasn't stopped there, brethren and sisters. USA flies B-25 bombers over the Middle East for the third time this year. Those bombers can fly all the way from America across to Iran and back, or all the way around the world. It's a huge bomber. Not these, but that one over there is that bomber. And they've been flying them around Iran, warning Iran, like they warned with the killing of those 3 men. Please, they're saying, don't go too far. Don't provoke us, or we'll have to do something. That's the clear message. Okay? The clear message. And look at this. The flyover comes days after Israel's top general said the country's military was revising attack plans against Iran. More on that in a minute. And warned Biden against returning to the Iranian nuclear agreement, which he's trying to establish, that was established in 2005 and did not work. All right. So here we come again to the scriptures. Isaiah 38 verse 8 says of Israel. So we're coming over to Israel now. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is gathered out of many people, and which has been always waste, and they shall dwell confidently. The word there, safely, the margin says in the King James Bible, confidently, all of them. Israel does dwell confidently, brethren and sisters. It does dwell confidently. Indeed, very confidently. Go back to 1981. And in 1981, Israel launched her planes in that day. From here, the coast of Israel, there's the area of Israel. It's not so clear on that PowerPoint there. And flew them all the way over to Iraq and hit this base here, which was a nuclear reactor being set up in 1981 in Iraq. So they attacked the nuclear reactor then, way back there. It really was quite tricky getting enough fuel on board the planes to travel that whole distance in those days. But then they've acted again. 2007, they didn't sit on their hands. You see, here in Syria, way up in the back blocks of Syria, Syria began to build a nuclear reactor. And what did Israel do? It sent its planes this time and hit it, and that's how they left it. Blew it up. 2007. Is things changing? Well, Iraq has got 10 sites that need to be hit, and some of them deeply underground. What's going to happen? We don't know. But look what the papers are saying. Now we come to this year, look. Jumping ahead for a minute. White alarm. Iran is presumed just weeks away from a nuclear weapon. And here's the leader of military in Israel. Attention was drawn to Iran's sponsorship of terrorism by the explosion outside the Israeli embassy in Delhi on Friday, January the 29th. We've probably not heard about it, but it appears that that was triggered by Iran. Very provocative. Israel's chief of staff, there he is, provoked lively discourse by his blunt assertion last week that if Biden returns to the original nuclear deal, it would be bad and wrong. And he declared that Iran was just months, if not weeks, away from a nuclear weapon. What's Israel going to do, brethren and sisters? It's looking pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Here's that man again. Israeli military chief warns of new plans to strike Iran. They're preparing to do something. Israeli military chief warned Biden administration against joining the 2005 Iran nuclear deal. And that's what they're trying to do. Adding, he's ordered his forces to step up preparation for a positive offensive action against Iran during the coming year. Earlier it said weeks and months, this year. Well, it's going to be interesting. Would we see that, brethren and sisters? I suspect not, but we might. I wouldn't be surprised if we're taken before, because it could be pretty nasty. This is what Israel's expecting to have to do. Do some attacks right into their grand attacks, into the area of Iran, to quell Iran going nuclear, because their single aim is to destroy Israel. And this is what Iran's saying. Iran warns Lebanon, Gaza, we put special weapons in there and they can level Haifa and Tel Aviv to the ground. I suspect that may not necessarily be true yet, but that's a bit what they're saying. The Revolutionary Guard commander says priorities ready for confrontation with their missile capacity supported by Iran. And so what he is saying, here's Tel Aviv. There he is. We could attack it. Incredible. But what's Israel got to defend herself? Well, she's got the iron beam and the iron dome. Well, the iron beam is a laser device, and they say it's 100% accurate. It knocks out the trigger and the guidance network of the missile coming in, so it just plunges into the ground and blows up and doesn't hit, they hope, a city. Their iron dome is missiles that have been hugely accurate. But you see, if the missiles come in too big a numbers, they haven't got enough to defend themselves except by this means. And so, Israel has already acted. We attacked over 200 Iranian targets in Syria and destroyed their anti-aircraft batteries. How did they do that? They did that last year. You see, the situation is this. Stratfor says Russian radar has not seen Israel aircraft on it. And so Israel got a message from the Russians saying, we put S-400 missiles down the boundary of Israel last year, 2020. You fly over them now, they're our very best missiles, and they will hit you and blow you up. Do you understand? So Israel got on the telephone and phoned up the Greeks, because they'd bought them, and said to the Greeks, switch off the missile and switch on the radar. Do it for 4 days. That night, Israel flew over and came back. Got on the telephone again, said, did you see us? No, not yet. But we'll keep looking out for you. Oh, so you didn't see us on your radar? No. The next day, Israel did that. Hit at least 20 sites inside Russian-controlled Syria and blew them up. That's happened repeatedly this year or last year. So then Iran determined to attack Tel Aviv's water supplies and power supplies. Yes, it lasted for about 2 minutes. And the cyber attack was quelled by the Israelis. Somehow they blocked it. But Israel didn't stop at that. And they said, well, if you're going to attack us with those missiles, with those devices like that, if you're going to do that, he said, we'll attack you. So this is what Israel did. See that spot there? There's a very critical port at the Straits of Hormuz. Here's a picture of that port. And there's a picture on the web. It's been taken off since then. But a picture of what you could see. Israel hacked into the website for this city. The crane stopped working. There was pictures of ships swirling around in the harbour, couldn't find a wharf. There was pictures of traffic lights, red. Then they went around the next one, red, all the way around. Then they turned around. You could see going up over the hill, 3 lanes of traffic. 3 lanes of traffic. The city just ground to a halt for a whole week. And then Israel lifted it. Of course, they said, did you do it? Would we do a thing like that? But anyhow, looks like they did. So, anyhow, the situation is quite precarious. And Israel is repeatedly attacking into Syria at the moment. I think there's been 4 or 5 attacks this year into Syria to hit Iranian bases. I mean by this year, 2020, 2021. It hit 50 targets in Syria in 2020. Amazing. Got away with it. And Israel's doing other things, slightly going aside. Israel's leading the world on its inoculation against the coronavirus. This is Israel up here, and the next country there is Bahrain, and then UK. The rate at which they are inoculating, the rate's staggering. One day alone they inoculated 224,000 people. Staggering. They've now inoculated 2.45 million of their population, about 7 million needed to, injected with doses. And they're going flat out with it. And they've even been kind. Only the last day they gave 500 vaccinations. They didn't vaccinate the people, to the Palestinians, quelling the world's criticism of them for looking after themselves and not looking after Palestinians. So things are changing. And here, the leader of the Palestinians says, the situation's looking quite tricky. I need to ensure my power. It's almost looking like some of the people there are starting to become a little bit more pro-Israeli. Teresa, I can't think of her name, one of the editors of the Jerusalem Post, went over to the Palestinians and assessed them, how many would prefer to be under Israel, and came back with 71% would prefer to be under Israel. So it appears he'd like to go to an election again. First time in 15 years. And there it is. May, July, this coming year, if it comes to it. So what's going to happen, brethren and sisters? Well, you know this quote pretty well. That's Ezekiel 37. I've numbered it. Behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone, and gather them on every side and bring them into their own land. And that's happened. And I will make them one nation in the land. There it is. But look what it goes on to say. Upon the mountains of Israel. Well, here's the mountains of Israel. They've got at least 500,000 people on the West Bank area, Jewish people. And Putin and Netanyahu said, in the last, if an election comes up, he'd like to be assured of that, and he says, we'll annex the West Bank. If that happens, well, he's already said this year, January to 21st, we're going to build another 2,500 settlers' homes in the West Bank right away. And he said that before Biden had full power. So he's expecting 650,000 Jews to be in the West Bank there, East Jerusalem and West Bank. And so, brethren and sisters, one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel also. But look where it ends. One king shall be king to them all. There we are, brethren and sisters, 6 steps. We're done 4 of them. 5's almost done, it would appear. And then Christ's return. So this time is very short. We need to make sure we appreciate that. Well, let's come to our last heading. Putin's, the powers polarised. Well, you see, what's happening? What's happening, brethren and sisters? The Sunni nations and the Shiite nations are separating. And there, we can see these nations down here in the Persian Gulf area are fearful of those over there. They haven't got the same form of Muslim belief, and they're fearful. The area of Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, Oman, I'm going a little bit too fast. They've been arming themselves frantically. But they know they can't do it. They can hope, but it's only through Israel that they can be protected. So they're allying with Israel. So here is Sheba and Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions. So they're going to be allied more toward the Western nations. And so it's going to be Oman, United Arab Emirates, Yemen, and possibly Saudi Arabia. More on that in a second. So today, they say, we are one family, the family of the sons of Abraham. There they are. Look at them. There's the Arab leaders early in the peace, October last year. And more are coming together. Now Morocco's joined up with it. So here, more and more of those states in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula are joining up, primarily, I believe, because of fear of Iran. And so here's the situation as it is. United Arab Emirates, September. Bahrain, September. There they are with Trump. Sudan, October the 23rd. Morocco, December the 10th. And Oman, they say, well, we'll soon do so probably. And same with Saudi Arabia. Things are swinging dramatically. But there's one country, do you know what it is? That hasn't joined up yet. Here it is. Yemen. There's Yemen, the end of there's the Saudi Arabia's up there. Oman's over here. Here's the Indian Ocean here. Here's where Aden is. All right? So, Yemen's new government sworn in, ending months of wrangling. Now, what happened was 3 powers controlled Yemen. The Houthi rebels, supported by Iran, terrorists, and 2 other areas. And the other 2 didn't agree. So there was squabbling and fighting going on there, and nothing could come to pass. Saudi Arabia stepped in, flew the whole lot of the leaders of the 2 moderate governments up to Saudi Arabia, and there they met. And they spoke to them. Said, you've got to come together and clean up the Houthi rebels. You've got to make this country settled. And so they achieved that somewhat. It's quite interesting. They put them then back on a plane to fly down to Yemen. When they got to Yemen, the plane, as it landed, was attacked. Nobody got killed by the Houthi rebels, attacked by the Houthi rebels. But I'm sure those people on board the plane were even more determined when they got off that we've got to wipe out those Houthi rebels and become truly a peaceful Yemen or Sheba. And so we expect that country also, possibly after Christ's return, allied to Israel. Well, other countries are listed in the scripture, Ethiopia and Libya. Ezekiel 38 says, Persia, Ethiopia, Hebrew Cush, and Libya, Put, with them. All of them were shield and helmet. Well, there's a map with Put. It's hard to see, but there's Egypt just underneath my blanked in bit. It's modern Iraq, modern Libya. And the Cush area down here near there's Yemen. There, the access to the Red Sea. Incidentally, just let me come aside a little bit for a moment. The Red Sea has an access into it 18 kilometres wide. 18 kilometres wide. So you see, Russia would like to control that too. So they're allying themselves, yes, with Libya and with this area here, which is modern Sudan and Ethiopia. So let's look at Libya for a moment. Well, here we come, midway through last year. Russian MiG diplomacy. USA, Turkey, Russia and Egypt square off over Libya. So they're all conflicting. Who's running the country? Who's getting control of it? It's in chaos. They're fighting with each other. It's very critical, brethren and sisters, because lots of oil comes from Saudi Arabia, from Libya, exported to Europe. So the Russians rapidly up the stakes in Libya and deploy aircraft to Libya. It's a big play for Russia. Ooh. So what's going on? Well, you see the oil comes from there into Europe. They want to get Europe under their control. They want the image to stand up, and one good way is to cut off all the oil and tell them, submit to us. And they now have that capacity to do so. But further to that, coming through to this year, how Russia sways its way to more influence in Libya. This low-cost strategy has enabled Moscow to become an impossible to circumvent power broker in the country. They've got it. They've got Libya. So the scene looks like it's now almost under Russian control. But what about the area of Sudan? Ethiopia, as we said. Ethiopia more that total area that I've pointed to. Russia is building a naval base in Sudan. Why would they want to do that? Ushering in a new footing in Africa. Port Sudan facility will be Moscow's first substantial military presence on the continent since the fall of the Soviet Union. So they're trying to get in there. And here's some of the ships off the coast coming into that port area they want. Here's where it's going to be. There we can see one Russian base, this one in Sudan, and this one more in the Ethiopian area, Eritrea and Ethiopia, the broader Ethiopia area. All right? So there they are. There's the ships arriving off the Sudan. All they have to do is cut off that 18 kilometres. And what's going to happen to the West trying to go through the Suez Canal? What's going to happen to everybody trying to get their oil from Saudi Arabia and so forth? More on that in a second. So you see, Russia is in a position to close the Red Sea, stopping Saudi Arabia exporting oil with naval ports in Kush. They could close the Suez Canal, they could close the bottom end. See the way they're moving? And here is Saudi Arabia's oil, over here. We get 82% of our oil through the Persian Gulf. We're very dependent on oil coming through there, and it's escorted by British naval ships as they come out. But Saudi Arabia also gets oil by a pipeline and then sails it up to the Suez Canal and then pumps it through a pipeline on the parallel side to the Suez. The ships are too big to go through the Suez Canal. And then it goes into Europe by ship again. So you see, if Russia controls Egypt and the bottom of the Red Sea, they can control that oil. Staggering what they're moving on. And so United Arab Emirates gets oil out of there too, and it's got a problem. If Russia stops them, how are they going to get their oil out? Well, they've just got a solution recently. Here it is, look. Where did they send the oil this time? Up here, through Eilat, into Israel. It's a bit hard to see there on that map. Out through Ashkelon. So they sent their oil through a pipeline from Eilat to Ashkelon and then to the area in Europe. So they weren't using the Suez Canal. Can you follow that? Sorry about that map there, but it's sharper on my computer, or this one here on the scene. You can see it very easily. Well, I hope that's been very clear. I want to leave it there and come back to where we started for a moment and bring our talk to a close. You see, brethren and sisters, it's vital that we watch. Why? Because it stirs us up, makes us enthusiastic, makes us look at ourselves and ensure that we're preparing ourselves. 2 Peter, like that book in Revelation 16, is a letter of love. Peter tells us that this is his final urgent letter as he is about to die a martyr, as Jesus had predicted. Clearly his words are vital. You see, he said in 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 14, knowing that shortly I must put off this my tabernacle, even as the Lord Jesus Christ hath showed me. In John 21, Jesus said, yes, you'll perish. You'll die a martyr. He knew it was about to come. And here was his final letter to us. Or to those then, but to us also. Remember, it goes through to the second coming of the Lord. And so what does he do? Well, he gives a very powerful exhortation, but he also says something here. Look at this. In chapter 1, verse 16 to 18, he speaks of their visit up into the northern area of Israel, 3 of the apostles with Jesus, and they went to the Mount of Transfiguration. He calls it the Mount of the Lord. And there they saw Moses and Elijah and Jesus in glory. Moses, he went to the Mount of God, Sinai, and he saw the character of God. Behold, the goodness and severity of God, which is manifest in Christ. And Elijah, what did he do? Well, he raced down to Sinai too. What was he taught? It's not in the earthquake, it's not in the wind and fire, but it's in the still small voice. And then Peter adds these words. what he was told and what he heard is, at that mount, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, brethren and sisters. Hear ye him." So you see, here he is writing this letter, preparing everybody for AD 70 or the second coming. And the big point that he wants to make is, manifest God. Behold that wonderful character, the perfect balance between mercy and severity. And if you're going to do that, look at the Lord Jesus Christ and hear ye him, and you will be saved. So you see, a letter of love, here's the appeal. Well, the days are short. Christ's return is almost here. So in our reading last night, Romans 13, and that knowing the time, as we do, that now it is high time to wake up out of sleep. Look at what we've seen tonight, the grimness of the scene. For now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. Yes, it is, isn't it? It's very near. So let us be prepared, brethren and sisters. The days are indeed very short. Thank you.